Stephanie's MarshStream. I'm Stephanie, Artistic Director and founder of the Marsh and MarshStream. So glad you are all here today to see this incredible show with my special guest, Mike McFadin. There he is. Up here on Trinity County, we'll see how well this Zoomy stuff works up here. The internet isn't as easy down near Silicon Valley, as my friend Bridget Carson says. Okay, without further ado, I want to introduce the incredible Mike McFadin, who I met up near in the Trinity Alps, near the Bowerman's barn, where I was going to visit the mules with my dog Trinity. And he was there because he was making a big path at the Bowerman's barn. And Mike is the Wilderness and Trails Program Manager for the National Forest Service. He is a cowboy poet, a storyteller, a philanthropist, and I'm so glad you're on this show. Welcome, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Looks beautiful behind you.
Oh, good. Glad to hear it. I'm wearing my new hat, my vest, shirt, and I'm not wearing pants because we're on Zoom, right?
Don't even say that. I hope you are wearing pants, Mike. So anyway, so tell me something. How did you begin? You're in the National Forest Service. How did you get there? What made you become a National Forest Program Director for the Wilderness Trails?
Well, I guess I was kind of born to it. My dad was a ranger, forest ranger. And that's a title. A lot of people think, anybody that's wearing the same uniform, we're all rangers to the general public. The ranger is actually a title for the boss of the big area, a ranger district. So, I grew up seeing the Forest Service and all that. And I like being in the woods and always have. And so I joined the military. And when I got out of the military, I moved to Alaska to work for the Forest Service. And then it just developed into a career.
So are you from Trinity County, or did you move here to be the job with the Forest Service?
Well, that's funny because my first memories were here in Trinity County when I was a little guy. But we moved to Covelo, and that's where I spent most of my youth, was in Covelo, California, which is on the Mendocino National Forest. Not many people know where that place is, but yeah, pretty special place.
So how did you get involved with the mules?
Well, got bugs flying around me here. Doing what I do, most of my career has been as a trail builder, all through the wilderness areas and non-wilderness areas. I've built trails for Jeeps and motorcycles and bicycles and people that use mobility aids, all kinds of trails. I really, really like trails. They have a special place in my heart. They connect people, so to speak, and they also connect people to nature. So I think that's really cool. But I forgot what the original question was, Stephanie.
I remember, luckily. How did you get involved with the mules?
Got it. So doing what I do with the trails, especially in wilderness areas, that work is nearly impossible to do without the assistance of the pack strings and the horses and mules, especially when you talk about large diameter wildernesses. Some wildernesses are long and skinny, and you can pop in and out and cross the whole wilderness on foot in a matter of hours. But if you try to do it long ways, it's quite a bit longer. But the larger diameter wildernesses are really difficult to get into the middle of them. And around here, we have some very large wildernesses, and other places I've worked, very large wildernesses. So if we're going to get some trail built or repaired, deep in the backcountry, I can either wear myself and our own gear, and we might spend the better part of a week shuffling all of our stuff in there and tools, and some of those things we just flat can't carry. Or we can use the mule strings and the horses to bring those supplies in and the gear in, because they're they're really strong animals, and they're very useful for what we do. I always tell people, use the right tool for the right job. And if mules had thumbs, we'd probably have a whole lot more trail work getting done, but they don't. They carry stuff on their back, so that's what they do best, and that's what we use them for. And the people with thumbs, they get to do all the hand tool work.
So are you the pack leader, or the mule pack leader of the Trinity Alps Mule Pack, or what is your title in relationship to the mules?
Well, I guess I'm kind of head flunky bench warmer. I manage the wilderness program at large, but I've got packers that work for me that, you know, I sign their pay sheets. But they're incredible people. If it can be packed on an animal, they can do it. They know those animals inside and out. They do medical on animals. They do, you know, the farrier, horseshoeing, and like I said, if it can physically be done with a mule, they can get it done. I consider myself kind of the B team packer. I can pack, which is different than I am a packer, because packers, they're the ones that can rebuild their gear on the fly. They know those animals and how to get those loads on, whereas most of the time I'm going, it's kind of looking over my shoulder a lot, hoping those loads don't flop over backwards.
So you don't have the trust in yourself that you have in those packers when you pack those mules. So
certainly not.
You know, you've written a book. You've written a book because there's this one mule and his name is Ivan. And I presume you call whoever named him. Did you name Ivan?
No, actually our lead packer here, Eric Court's named Ivan, and his full title is Ivan the Terrible. In fact.
And why does he have that name?
Well, he's a funny mule. He's really, really intelligent. And I liken him to that smart kid in class who's always getting in trouble because the teachers can't keep him occupied or her occupied. You know, they're so smart they get bored and then get into trouble, and smart enough that their trouble can be a lot of trouble. Ivan is just one of those mules that's 100% personality. And Eric named him, but I ended up writing the book about that mule. He and I became pretty good buddies, Ivan. When we first got that mule, along with a bunch of others from Tennessee, we got a big shipment of them, 13. But Ivan managed to get himself into trouble before we even got to use him. He had rammed himself into a piece of sharp metal that he found somewhere. We don't know what it was. The saying is, if there's anything a horse or a mule can injure themselves on in a pasture, they'll find it and they'll do that. And Ivan did. And so it was a pretty grievous wound to his shoulder. And long story short, he and I spent a lot of time together doing physical therapy to get that wound to heal up right. I had some good coaching from the packers in the area how to deal with it, but we spent hours together every day dealing with that for a while. And so Ivan and I became pretty good buddies through that process. And then eventually I wrote the book about Ivan because he's just got so much character.
So tell us some highlights of Ivan the Terrible's escapades.
He's adept at escaping. He is a Houdini mule, but he doesn't go on a tear around town or nothing like that. He just likes to get out and just to show that he can. It's almost an attitude thing of, you're not as smart as I am. And he's calmed down a fair bit over the years, but at first there we had a real hard time keeping him in the pen. He's able to take a dog's snap link. We often have those on our chains to hold the gates closed and stuff like that. He can put that in his mouth and work it around and open the gate that way. Another example of Ivan's clowning around is I came in one day and found him with a gate around his neck, and he was chasing the other mules around in the corral with it. And when I rolled in, I thought, oh, good Lord, what am I going to do? How am I going to get this gate off this mule's neck? You know, this is not a good thing. This is very, I was pretty excited. I thought this was a big problem, but as I drove in and got out of my pickup and Ivan saw me, he put his head down and kind of twisted it up out of the gate, and the gate fell down, and he just walked around like, oh, that wasn't me. He was terrorizing the rest of them mules on purpose, because that's just the kind of goofy mule he is. Another funny escapade, which we actually have an illustration of, if I can share my screen. How's that for sharing a screen? This is the book, the Ivan book. One of the things that a lot of the things that Ivan did are in this book are real, actual things that Ivan pulled off as a goofy mule. And here's an illustration of one of those things. And I don't know, it's been a few years, maybe 7 years ago, when Ivan was relatively new. We were coming back from a big pack trip. There was several pack strings involved, and the lead packer had Ivan in his trailer, and he was ahead of me. And it's funny, his wife was actually riding with me that day in the pickup, and we were visiting about this, that, and the other thing. And all of a sudden we see the trailer just kind of jerk and swerve, and the lights went off on the tail lights and everything. And we thought, well, what the heck was that all about? And as soon as Eric could, he got pulled over, and we got pulled over behind him there. And we looked in the back there, and sure enough, the wires that come from the front of the trailer and across the headboard and then down to the tail lights and into the brake system and stuff, they're exposed inside the trailer. And directly above where Ivan was tied was frayed wires. And Ivan had a shocked look on his face. And what we determined was, Ivan was looking at those darn wires, and he couldn't stand it and had to figure out what they were, and he started chewing on them, and he shocked himself pretty good and jumped around in the trailer and kicked it or whatever. Mules and horses are very sensitive to electricity. They don't like that very much. But those are some of the examples of what that mule gets into. He's a funny mule. He's always up to something.
Was Ivan the one that saved in the book? Didn't Ivan save a firefighter? Because these pack mules go into the fires, right? They go in and work those fires that are up in the mountains. Is that correct?
It's true that we use them on the fires, but Ivan has never rescued a firefighter. That was pure fantasy as part of the kids' book. And here you can see in the book, Ivan rescuing the firefighters. If you were to stand by a mule and see the panniers, you'd quickly realize that you're not going to fit two people on them. It doesn't work that way. I wouldn't be surprised if Ivan could do it or would do it if he had the opportunity. But the reality of it is he did not. But we do use those mule strings on fires quite a bit. It's a huge, huge savings for the taxpayer when we use those animals. We haul groceries to the firefighters, equipment, and we haul water and anything they need out there. We can bring it in there, and then also we haul their garbage out when we make the return trip. I've heard people say, should do it with a helicopter. What a waste of time. This is, all this romantic blah blah blah. But the reality is safer and much more inexpensive than the helicopters for that. And earlier I mentioned, use the right tool for the right job. Those helicopters are invaluable for fighting fire. They can deliver water on that fire and cool that fire off, or perform, things that need to happen really quickly that a mule string can't do. And by us doing the grocery runs and hauling out the trash, we free those helicopters up to do the more critical missions. And so, we're not in competition at all with the helicopters. We kind of go hand in hand with them, and we complement them to an extent. But the biggest thing two things is safe and inexpensive. One of those helicopters running for 2 days is our entire annual budget. Those helicopters aren't cheap, and I'm not trying to shoot them down. They're a valuable tool. I'm just saying we're incredible value to the taxpayer when it comes to hauling any of that goods into the woods, whether it's for firefighters or archaeologists or fish biologists or whoever needs things brought into these roadless areas. we're pretty darn cheap, and we have a really good safety record.
Well, I'm not gonna keep pushing the whole mule thing, but I just want to bring something up. I started a mule war some years ago because I was taking apple photos with the mules. I don't know if you can see behind me, there's the mules and an apple. And when I was done, I wanted to give the apples to the mules. So I threw the apple and it went in between Ivan and the next set of mules. And Ivan started a huge war. 18 mules were all fighting, trying to get or maybe 16 mules. But anyway, the shocking thing about it, besides the fact that I didn't videotape it because I was scared they were going to get out of the fence, anyway, was that the horse is the one that got the apple. And I want you to explain to me, when there's 18 fighting mules, a horse could just walk up and pick up that apple.
They're herd animals, and it's funny. Doesn't matter how many you have in the corral, there's a pecking order. There's always a pecking order. And everybody in that corral knows that pecking order. They know who's number 1, who's number 2 to number 3, all the whole chain of command. They've got it sorted out. And every day there may be a little discussion. It could be number 6 and 7 are trying to figure out if they should exchange spots in line, and it could be numbers 10 and 11. Some discussion every day over this chain of command. But the other thing that's solid is the chain of command for mules starts at the end of the chain of command for horses. Horses are the leaders of the herd every time. My theory is every single mule's mom was a horse, so they gravitate toward those horses. They love those horses. They get horse sick over horses. We always are joking around about poor old Joe the horse, the white horse we have. He often is the only horse around, and he's just got a mob of mules all around him all the time. And the pecking order of the mules reflects who's standing closest to Joe at the time, who gets to be near Joe. And if we take the horse and leave the mules behind, those mules, they put on a big show. They yodel around. Bring my horse back. You know, they really love those horses. So yeah, horses rule the roost, and then after that, the mules get to fight over the next apple.
So for people who don't know, mules are a combination of horses and donkeys, right? And most of the time, the horses are the mothers because it's easier, right? But when the donkey is the mother, then they're called finnies or something. Hinnies.
Yep.
And
yep.
And then you have to know if then the donkey would be the alpha. All right, so much mule talk, but I know you're a cowboy poet, and I think you've got a poem about a horse, the mules, right, and the bees. Are you ready? Are you willing to give us some cowboy poetry?
Sure, you bet. But before we get away from this, I do want to throw out a quick plug for these books, because you know, I wrote the book, but Gabe Varian did the illustrations. And if you know horses and mules, you can look at Gay's illustrations and you can tell what every single animal is thinking. She is an incredible artist, and she did the cartoons for the illustrations for this book. We have another book just came out that's all cartoons that Gay did, and both of these books have been donated to charitable events. The Ivan book is owned by a nonprofit now, and so all the sales of this book go towards youth education, predominantly towards the natural resource world. We send kids to ecosystem camp, and we send kids on backpacking trips into the wilderness and things like that with the money that we get from the Ivan book. And then the cartoon book, which I just can't say enough good things about Gay's illustrations. I mean, they are just hilarious. If you know animals, you can read their minds by looking at her pictures. By and large, the best mule cartoon artist there is. But this book is donated to the Trinity County Fair Board, and we make from this is going to help supplement our county fair, and it's a real town fair. It's like going back in time when you go to our fair, and so we're real glad to be able to help out with that, with these books. That's where all the money goes from the sales. And somewhere Daniel was saying there's links you can find if you're smarter than me with a computer, to find out how to buy those books, or maybe we'll bring that up again in a minute. But you were asking about poems. When we do cowboy poetry, we say we tell a poem because it's like telling a story. We don't recite a poem, we tell it. Cowboy poetry is kind of funny. A lot of people say that it's for cowboys that don't know how to play a guitar and can't carry a tune. But I got involved with it just because I don't know, I started doing it. But anyhow, every one of these has a story to tell. And I'll start off with this story to tell about a time me and another guy went in to our backcountry crew. We have a Country California Conservation Crew is one of our big programs we run here, where these young adults, they sign up for a program and they go into the wilderness 5.5 months and they never leave. We bring in all their groceries with the mules, we bring in their mail, we bring tools they need for their projects, and these young adults, they just work their butts off. It's a crazy schedule. They basically start their day at about 5 in the morning and end their day at about 8 at night. It's a lot of work they get done. But we got a crew early in the spring, like we always do, and we had to put them in to an area that was snow free, which is on our west side. So as we put this crew in, it was pretty nasty weather, lots of rain, lots of sleet. After we go there for a week or two, we was going to move them to another location. And so as we were riding in, well, I guess long story ahead, the crew leader there, he woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and saw that it was sleeting. He thought, we can't make it over this pass. I'm going to have to check. And he took off at a run with a flashlight, and he went a couple thousand vertical feet and found knee-deep snow. And he knew that these new Corps members, were pretty green, and they were really susceptible to blow out their knees and stuff. A lot of them hadn't done this kind of exercise, and so he made the call that they weren't going to go over this snowy pass. So instead of picking up their gear around to their next camp and meeting them, they were walking out the trail we were riding in on. And we had a whole bunch of brand new mules getting trained, and off we went. And the first rodeo started about a quarter mile from the trailhead. We got down there, and here comes these guys across the bridge. Their crew leader decided, because their van was broke down, they only had a pickup, he was going to send them 2 or 3 at a time down the trail so that nobody ended up sitting at the trailhead freezing their butts off while they're driving back and forth with the pickup, because it was about 18 miles for the truck to drive. So we ran into a group of 2 or 3, and the mules lost it. And we ended up repacking some things. It was a big rodeo. Then we got across the bridge. Wasn't very much further. We ran into 2 more of them. And now it's raining, so these guys are all wearing California-issued bright fluorescent green and yellow rain gear, just like you'd see on the side of the road. They're new to the wilderness, a lot of them, so they're a little bit nervous of bears. They might have their coffee cup, their little tin cup hanging on the side, clang, 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 clang. And so we ride up on these 2 gals walking down the trail. And the first one, she sees us, and she's exhausted. She's got 2 backpacks on. She just lays down and curls into the fetal position. The other one grumbles and cusses. We found later that she could make a sailor blush, this lady. And she wandered off down the trail, and Eric looked at me over his shoulder and said, "This is gonna hurt." And he went riding past this poor lady that was curled up around a poison oak bush. And sure enough, his horse made it just fine because he's a good horse, but the whole pack string jumped off the trail, and it was a really steep spot. I thought I was gonna watch the whole thing die right there. But they managed to scramble back onto the trail. And then as I rode up, all my mules thought, well, if they did it, I got to do it too. But I looked down at that lady and said, I bet you won't do this again. I back down and went back to crying. So that was the second rodeo. We had about 12 more rodeos that day as we worked our way in, because these new mules weren't used to this. So we get out, and then we had to go back in the other way to go bring their camp in. But when we got out that night, from packing in all this stuff and repacking and having all these rodeos, we untied our loads in the dark. It was pretty much pitch black at the trailhead when we did this. And that day, it didn't rain the whole day. I can tell you that. A lot of the day it sleeted and some of the day it snowed, but it didn't rain the whole day. So the next day we had to repeat everything again, passing the corps members on their way in. So that whole story is how this poem happened. So like I said, every poem's kind of a story in itself, and that's the backstory to this. I wake up in the cab, stiff, cold, shivering. My clothes are still wet. I hear the mules fidgeting. It's time to start work, but it isn't light yet. It was raining when we rode in, pitch black by feel. We unsaddled in bed. The green mules didn't like our flashlights, especially when worn on our heads. By the time we were done caring for the mules, it was well past 10. We were soaked, battered, hungry, and frozen. Today, we do it again. Dinner was cracker and 3 cans of beer, a half a bag of chips, and jerky made from a deer. The sound of the rain on the roof of the truck coming down hard makes me wish I was a duck or a frog, a beaver, a otter, or newt. The wind starts to blow. Now, isn't that cute? Miserable. This is what sorts out the men from the boys, the people of action from those that just make noise. The dome light comes on as I open the door. I stare at a puddle under my feet on the floor. My shoulder bone pops, my finger bones creak, my hat's all clammy, and my raincoat has a leak. I stumble around in the dark and the mud, giving each mule some hay, some soggy alfalfa, and a soft-spoken word to start off their day. It sounds like hell, if you know what I mean, but for some reason we call it living the dream. So that's that poem.
Thank you for telling us that poem. So do you have another one? Do you have a few you want to do? What's your plans here, Mike?
Sure, I can tell a few more. One that seems to be a lot of people's favorite is a poem about bees. And these are not the domestic variety that we steal honey from, that are bovine and slow and sloppy and actually kind of a sweet little bug. When I say bees, I'm talking about hornets, yellow jackets, those nasty little ground bees. They're probably one of the most dangerous things we deal with out there in the woods. You know, people ask us if it's mountain lions or bears or Sasquatch. You can see Sasquatch. He's one of my best buddies. But it's none of those things bother the mules so much. But bees, it's every man, mule, beast for themselves when we get in a bee swarm. And like those corps members I was talking about, I even tell them if we're out and you kick up a bee's nest, you better run away. But if you run towards me, I'll hit you with rocks. I'll throw sticks at you because those bees will follow you right into the mob. So friends run away from friends when you get into the bees. But it can get pretty dicey. I'm guessing a lot of people on this little Zoom chat thing haven't had experience with large animals in the woods. So imagine you've got 4 or 5 plus pound animals behind you that are really well trained and doing a great job. But when those bees hit, all training goes right out the window. Now suddenly you've got 4 or 5 of these big giant animals trying to pass you, and the trails out here are quite often not much wide, and there's a lot of places where if you get off that trail, it could be the end of it, or something get broke, or somebody get hurt, or one of the mules get hurt. So it gets really dicey. I'll share one little story with you that's similar to what's going on in this poem. Me and a couple of the packers, we had been assigned to a fire near Coffee Creek, and for some reason we ended up with no bebop in the trucks. We all had our own trucks and we all had our own gear and everything, but we always have bebop in case we run into bees. But for whatever reason, we had ran out or something. And this trail we had to go in on had 5 or 6 bee nests, and these horses and mules, every time we rode in and out, they knew where we were and when the bee's nest was coming. They just get amped up. And one day we told the fire crew that we needed bebop and they were going to buy it. They had these buying teams, and they decided to save 50 cents a can and buy an off brand of this stuff. And it turned out to not be much of a savings, because then we rode 3 strings, and the lead guy, he was hollering back, I think it's right here by the stump, and he was going to shoot these bees right from the saddle of his horse. And sure enough, he gets right there on them, and he goes to spray those bees, and instead of shooting a 20-foot stream of bee poison, it kind of comes out like Febreze. It's just, it's not going to do nothing. And by then the bees are on him. And so he takes off whipping and spurring to get out of these bees. And the guy in front of me looks over his shoulder and says, oh man, here we go. And he goes into the melee. And then I'm kind of just shaking my head back there going, oh boy, now they're really mad. And off I go with my string into this swarm of mad bees, and they're stinging the horses and mules behind me. And all these guys are, trying to ride past you, they're racing around. And so as you're riding and trying to hold on and not get bucked off, you've got your lead rope and you're beating them in the face and telling them to get back and not pass you. Cause those ropes kind of like well, the term clothesline. You don't want a mule to pass you if you've got the lead rope in your hand. He'll yank you off that horse. So anyway, so we got him under control eventually, and we stopped, and I'd been hit a few times, and I was a little upset, and I was ready to kill those bees. And I hollered out, give me that bee spray. And Eric said, oh, we'll get him on the way back. I said, give me the bee spray. So he threw it to Matt, and then Matt threw it to me. And then I kind of low crawled up on this bee's nest and almost had to stick my arm in the hole and sprayed them. But we got them, and we didn't have to deal with them anymore. But those are the kind of things we deal with these bees. They really trigger on those mule strings for some reason. Oftentimes a hiker can sneak on by and it doesn't bother them too bad, but you get those big heavy mules stomping the ground and it sends vibrations into their nests. And I don't know if they think a bear's trying to dig them up or what, but they come out ready to fight. They don't mess around. They just get right after it. I can remember another time where Eric and I was coming out with loads, and we about had a wreck on this bridge, which was kind of funny in itself. And I remember at one point, a plunger had fell off of his back load there. It's actually a metal can on the end of a stick that's called a Maytag that the kids do laundry with them. Instead of having a washing machine, they use these Maytags, and it fell off. And as we went across this bridge, my horse, Poncho, he saw that Maytag laying in the middle of the bridge, and suddenly that was triggering, this is probably what's going to kill me. And so I saw him looking over the side of the bridge, weighing his options, whether he wanted to jump off the bridge or step over that plunger. And I was ready to hop off. It's 30 or 40 feet down into sure death down there, and I'm not going to ride this horse over that rail. So thank goodness Poncho decided to go over it. So we did that, and it wasn't but 100 feet later, all of a sudden I feel Poncho bucking, and I think, what is this all about? And I look back, and he's not bucking. He's got Noble with bees all over his head trying to rub them off on Poncho's rump. And I thought, oh, geez. And so I hollered out bees, and off we went. The race is on. Everybody's kicking and stomping, and we get out of it. And we stopped to fix our gear, because often when you're out running them bees, your packs on them pack animals are rotate around. You can see, I'll share my screen again. These big packs on these animals, they can rotate and get loose. So we were stopped to fix them, and here come the corps members behind us. And they're yelling bees, and they brought them up on us. So we had escaped, and they brought them to us. So like I said, friends run away from friends when you're under a bee attack. But I could tell bee stories for probably 2 or 3 days straight. But instead, you asked for a poem. So I'll tell you my bee poem. Let me wet my whistle here. Spitting feathers. Not sure how I got here. Straight on my back, I look up through the trees. Then it all comes back. I can't begin to tell you how much I hate bees. Riding along on a sunny day, and it seemed things were going quite well, when up from the ground with a soft buzzing sound came a swarm of winged demons from hell. My horse had awoke him. The lead mule made him mad. Second mule back got hit. The third mule got hit bad. The fourth and the fifth had their ears laid back, and it seemed they were in a bee fog. As they jumped and they kicked, they stove in the nest at the base of the hollow log. The mules all rushed forward, jostling their packs. They were not strangers to all of the dangers of spontaneous hornet attacks. I threw the reins forward and hollered out, "Bees!" While cussing and swatting, I hung on with my knees. I could see the lead mule had 10 on his face as he shook his big head all around. He got hit from behind and launched into space as more hornets boiled up from the ground. As I was launched in the air, yeah, okay. I thought I lost my place there. As I was launching in the air like a ride at the fair, my horse jumped towards the sky. My one and only care was the poor landing there. And I thought, this is it. I might die. I landed in a heap. One rein I did keep, so at least I wouldn't have to walk. But I thought I was dead as I hit my head on a very large moss-covered rock. So here I do lie, looking up at the sky, watching the tops of the trees. I hope that's a bit of fly buzzing on by, because man, do I ever hate bees. That's the bee poem.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So tell us, so I talked to my sister who is a beekeeper out in Illinois, and she was saying those aren't bees like you said. You all call them bees, but they're hornets and wasps, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They're hornets. Even the wasps aren't too bad. You know, the mud daubers and stuff like that, they don't seem to bother us or the horses too bad. But those yellow jackets in particular, they can be ferocious. And they're just jerks. You know, it doesn't take much to rile them up, and they're ready to fight. And they can sting more than once. I've seen a bee stinging like a sewing machine. Just yeah, they're rough stuff. And it's funny, a lot of people get pretty worked up if they get hit by a bee. You know, they'll take pills and go to the hospital, and you know, maybe think they're gonna die. And you know, some people are allergic to them. There's no doubt about it. But a lot of times, boy, we'll get hit. I think my record was 21 times I got hit by yellow jackets just right in a row. Bang, bang, bang. I had welts all over me. And yeah, it's tough stuff. We have a rapid fire math we do. If there's more than one person around and the horses or mules start getting stung, without hardly even thinking about it, we know who's closest, even if you're only a few inches closer than the other guy, because whoever's closest has got to go into that melee. I can remember once Joe the horse was getting mauled, and we did the quick split-second math, and Eric was closest. He had to go in there, and that horse was throwing a fit, and I've never seen a horse get stung so many times. And when Eric let him out, tied him off, and went to go get another one, Joe actually laid down. Like I said, I've never seen a horse get stung that many times, and he laid down. He was so worked up. And I recall another time where I was the loser. We'd set up a high line, which is a rope that helps protect the ecosystem, you know, to tie the mules up to when we're camping out and stuff. And we'd made it L-shaped with a tree where it ran to it and then to another. And we had to move brush around to get this thing set up. And we didn't kick the bees up. But as soon as we started tying them mules up, sure enough, there was a yellow jacket's nest under there. And we just delivered an archaeology crew in there. And these were retired folks. And I think they were, you know, pretty tired. It was hot and it was a long ways in. And I can remember seeing that mule kind of on the end of that rope running back and forth, and then dove into the rest of them. And I looked over my shoulder and saw all these people in camp kind of slack jawed and just going, whoa, and everybody's yoked up in sweat. And I thought, these guys are going to go right through that camp like a combine and just kill everybody. And I got to get them off the rope. And I was the closest one. And so into the melee I went. And I had them things bucking and kicking all around me. And I was untying them and running them out to Eric, was then running them over to the trees to tie them off. And you know, they were after the bees, the horses and mules were. I didn't get kicked. But boy, they were sure fighting those bees, and the bees were after the horses. I only got stung one time that day, and it was on my thumb. And I think I got stung untying one of the ropes, and the bee was on the rope maybe. But Yeah, it's crazy when those things hit. It spices up your day.
Spicy hornets. Do you have any bear stories for us?
Bears. Not really relating to mules, but I can tell you bear stories for sure. In fact, our crew that we have out in the Yola Bolas right now. What's that?
I said,
We
go ahead, tell us a bear story.
okay. Our crew out in the Yola Bolas right now, we knew they were going to be in bear area, and we sent them out with these big giant metal cans that made, out of aircraft grade aluminum. There's some kind of military surplus deal that we keep our food in, and big old giant chain to hold those things to a tree. And those bears worked and worked and worked trying to get into those cans, and they haven't done it yet, but they've done a lot of damage to that camp. Those pesky bears, they're like giant raccoons with an attitude when they're after your food. And we got two up in Canyon Creek right now, one of our Disneyland trails up here, and they're mugging campers left and right. They've figured out how easy it is. And so, the moral of that story is when you're out in the woods, make sure them bears don't get any of your food, because they get hooked on it. And it doesn't have to be food. It can be toothpaste. It can be neosporin, anything like that you'd never even think that a bear might like to eat. If it's greasy, like even bar oil for your chainsaw, they love that stuff. If you let a bear eat that stuff, he's going to be back. And if he doesn't find what he's looking for, he might start causing trouble. They say it's a lot of fun to feed a bear marshmallows till you run out of marshmallows. I've seen cars in parking lots where bears opened them up like tin cans looking for food and didn't find any food, but they thought it had a good time tearing them cars up. But anyway, I'll tell you a story about one of my most incredible bear encounters that I just it was heart stopping, and it was just amazing. It was when I lived in Alaska. I was fortunate enough, I got to work with the Misty Fjords Kayak Rangers. I went out with these two gals who were very competent kayakers, but they weren't real woodsy. And so my job was to go out there with them for a week or two and teach them some of the woodsy stuff, like what's the difference between a Marten trap versus a mink trap. There's little variances that they wouldn't know, and what beach logging looks like, if somebody was stealing lumber off the beach, how to look for these types of things. I was kind of the guest redneck to teach these kayakers what they're supposed to be inventorying out there and helping them out a bit with that. And so I did, and actually, kind of add to this story, that one of the most incredible nature things happened to me on this trip, where I'm an early riser, and these gals I was working with, they weren't so much. And it didn't matter, because we were putting in 10 and 12-hour days. It didn't matter what time you woke up. It was light all the time. It was Alaska. And so even though they slept in, they worked hard. But I'd get up pretty early and take off and run around and go do stuff. And one day I went down the beach a ways, and I started seeing some beach logging activity. I could see the stumps, and I was chasing them and trying to inventory this little acreage that had been impacted, because this is, Misty Fjords National Monument. You're not supposed to do that. And I noticed a really big tree, and that had up a cliff, another tree had tipped into it. So, it did one of these things where 100 feet up, a tree was touching another tree on a cliff, and it was making a bridge, kind of a triangle. And I thought, I could get up in the top of that tree if I went up this cliff and then went across that log. And so I did. And when I got up there, I was wearing a bright blue flannel shirt, and before I know it, I had a blue jay coming at me and scolding me, and then another one and another one. And I thought, what is going on here? These things are just coming out of the woods, just all over the place. And I had at least a dozen of these things, and at times I'd have one sitting on a stick this far from my head, just cussing me, and it was like being in a Disney movie with all these blue jays all around. And then a couple of them, though, were kind of flirty and chortling, fluffing their feathers up and stuff. And I thought, I look like a giant blue jay. And these lady blue jays think I got maybe some superior genes. I might build a good nest. I'm a big one. I must eat well. So they're flirting with me. But all these guy blue jays, they're like, hey, can't you see there's 12 of us and only 2 ladies around here? Why don't you hit the road, Jack? You know, get out of here, new guy. And so that's why they were all after me. And it was the neatest thing. And at one point I started laughing, and, you know, I was 80 feet up in the canopy. And I leaned on the stick and it broke, and I almost fell out of that tree. And then suddenly I remembered where I was, you know, because I was just so wrapped up in it. And then, you know, my heart was beating, and I ended up, you know, I walked right out there on that log, but on the way out, I was kind of humping along, you know, terrified I was going to fall out of this tree. But by the time I made it back to camp, I still had 4 or 5 of these jays, and those ladies I was working with were teasing me, calling me the blue jay Pied Piper and this and that. But that ain't got nothing to do with the bear. The next day we paddled into a place, and we had a hard time finding a place to set up our camp because there's a big river that flowed in there, and there was a big mud slick, and the salmon were running like mad, and bears were everywhere. And so we finally found us a little trickle ways away from this river we were supposed to be going in to measure some stuff and check camp rings and things. And we set up, and we saw a little brown bear, and I thought, I'm going to go look for that bear. And the next morning, and so I got up early and off I went, and I paddled my kayak over there, and I drug it up onto the beach where I thought it'd be out of the tide, so the tide wasn't going to steal my boat from me. And I had this ridiculous looking nickel plated shotgun. That was what we're supposed to carry around for bear protection. And I made the conscious decision, you know, I said to myself, you're not working, you're just fooling around. You're walking into this bear kitchen, you know there's bears everywhere. If you get beat up by a bear, you deserve it. And so I made the conscious choice to leave that gun sitting up there against my kayak, and off I went. And I found that little bear, and I was kind of, you know, drifting along with him and really paying attention to the wind, because you know, the bears can smell really good. That's their best sense. And that a Native American saying I've heard is that when a pine needle falls off a tree, an eagle sees it, a deer hears it, and the bear smells it. They have really good smell. So I was really trying to pay attention to the wind and make sure this bear didn't smell me, and just observing him, because, you know, that's how I learn about wildlife is I watch him. And all of a sudden this little bear kind of did one of these looks both ways and takes off like a bat out of hell. And I'm thinking, oh, what's this all about? And I'm thinking it must have wind eddied and he caught whiff of me or something, and he took off. And then as I'm thinking this, I see clear over the tree line, quarter mile away, this enormous grizzly bear, and it's charging straight for me. It's coming at me 100 miles an hour, and I do a cartoon little and I look back and I can see my boat. It's about a quarter mile away, and I can see that stupid shotgun shining like a nickel-plated shotgun, and I know there's no way in the world I can make it to that gun to save my life. And as I spin back around to look at the bear, he's already cut half that distance in half. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And at this point, I'm not saying to myself, oh, I'm going to die. This bear's going to eat me. What I'm thinking is, that thing is fast. I could not believe how fast this bear was going. He was just coming across there, you know, like a cartoon where his back feet would pass his front feet. And so at the last minute, as he come running up, I thought to myself, well, I'm going to give a little of what I'm taking. I looked around, I picked up a big club stick, and then I thought, who are you kidding? And I stuck it in front of me, and I was just kind of trying to hope that bear would see me behind the stick. And between us was a little creek about 10 feet, 12 feet wide, and it wasn't but about that deep. You know, it was like high humidity. When you want to consider an obstacle for a bear, that thing was absolutely no obstacle at all. But he stopped on the other side of that little creek and slid to a stop, and he started popping his jaw, and he was swatting rocks around and just throwing a little bear fit. And when I'm saying he's swatting rocks around, I'm talking like 200-pound rocks, just whap, knocking them loose and throwing this little fit. He was doing little bear wheelies. He didn't ever like stand up on the movies where they're, he just was like raising his front feet up about a foot off the thing, and then he'd pound his paws down, boom, boom. And it was just the most incredible display of strength and rage going on over there. And the light was behind him, and you know, this thing was it had to be 1,000 pounds and 10 feet long. It was enormous. And his fur on his shoulders had to be this long, and it just standing straight up, and that light was coming through, and it was just all silver, and I could see his muscles ripple under that fur that was just all standing up. And I was just in awe of this animal. It was just incredible. And eventually he got done throwing his fit and wandered off. And I'm pretty sure what was going on with hindsight was that little bear had probably been told to stay out of that fishing hole, that that's my fishing hole. And that little bear was sneaking up to go steal some fish out of his fishing hole. And that big bear knew what was going on and came out there to whip him around a little bit. So that's why that little bear took off. And that's why that big bear didn't come over and eat me, because he was just wanting to tell that little bear who's boss. But I made it back to my boat, and I paddled back to camp, and I thought, I'm not saying a word about this. One of these special moments where it's just, this is my moment. I'm just holding this one to myself. But as I paddled into camp, it's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, what? You look like you've seen a ghost. And so I thought, oh, you guys weren't gonna believe this. And so I told him the story. And after we finished breakfast, I said, I really want to go see how big those footprints are on that bear, because that's how I know things. I saw that bear, and now I saw his footprint, so I know a footprint this big is a bear that big. And so they said that they'd come with me, and so we paddled in there, and we were kind of in a canyon of mud, and you couldn't hardly see over the top of it. And I just knew that bears was waiting for me to put my head up, but I looked, and it was clear. And the one gal, she said, "You guys are stupid. I'm not getting out of this boat." So she volunteered to hold our boats so they didn't want to wash away. But me and the other gal, we got out, and we went up there, and we found that bear's tracks. And there was an easy 10 feet between sets of tracks where this bear was airborne for 10 feet at a time between the tracks. And I could put my entire foot just in the heel print of this bear. So, the whole print was, 15 inches or more. Huge footprints from a huge bear. But there's my bear story for you, Stephanie. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a beautiful animal.
That was a good bear story. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Beautiful. We have some questions, but I just can't not ask you one more question, which is, do you have a mountain lion story?
Mountain lions. Yeah, I've got mountain lion stories. Those little boogers are elusive. People ask me, there are a lot of mountain lions out there, and have you ever seen one, or what's the chances of one, being in the area? And I always tell people that pretty much up here in this neck of the woods, every time you go to the woods, a lion sees you. You may not see them, and very rarely do you see them, but almost every time you're out here, a lion will see you. There's lots and lots of lions around here, and they mostly stick to their own business and do what lions do. But yeah, there's lots of lions around here. Trying to think. Well, since I told the bear story that was kind of up close and personal, I'll tell a lion story that was very similar. We'd rode into a backcountry camp, and it was a long ways into this camp. I want to say it was 14 miles one way just to get to this camp where these young backcountry corpsmen were working. And when we got there, I knew that the crew leader, she had asked me to go look at something further in. She had some questions about it, and that was another 6 miles. And so when we rode in, I hopped off and kind of rein tied my horse real quick and kicked off my boots and put on my sneakers and told Eric, well, I'll see you before dinner. And he says, that's cool. I got the horses. And off I went at a run or a jog, because I knew I had a long ways to go. And I also knew that it was lasagna for dinner that night, and I didn't want to miss dinner. So I was hustling, and I ran up this trail 6 or so miles, and I found the spot that Holly was talking about. And I looked it over and figured out what needed to be happening. I tied some flagging, took some pictures, and did all this kind of thing. And then as quick as I could, back to camp I go. And as I'm shuffling down this hill, real slaty kind of area with big pines and not a lot of brush, I was running down this hill, and I saw a log across the trail there. And I thought, well, that's weird. I don't remember that log there. It must have fell when I was, back in there further. And as I was thinking all these things, that log stood up. and turned around and looked at me. And it was a big old lion. It was a big tomcat lion. And it was the biggest mountain lion I'd ever seen, to include zoos or movies or anything. This thing was enormous. Its chest was just shocking, but it looked at me and kind of went, oh, you know, like, here comes this thing that scares me. And it hopped off the trail on the uphill side. And I guess that triggered my pursuit instinct, because when it took off, I thought, keep it moving. You know, I didn't want that thing out there above me. So I turned into the hill and chased after it. And it went probably 2 hops, and then it stopped and kind of looked and saw that I was after it, and it had a real shocked look and did a, you know, mountain lion noise, I guess, and then did a couple more hops, and then it went behind this big log on the second hop, and then it stopped and turned around and looked at me, and like, now I could see I scared that lion. I startled that lion. I surprised that lion. He's not scared, startled, or surprised anymore. He's ready to whip me if I keep this up. And I stopped and I thought, oh boy, you bit off more you can chew now. And he wasn't really doing it, but what I saw him doing was rolling up his sleeve saying, why don't you just come up here, boy? And we're going to talk about who's the biggest, baddest in this woods. And I started kind of, you know, doing the here, kitty, 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 you know, thing to him, because I was just thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do now? And then I also started thinking, if this thing doesn't eat me, no one's going to believe this. And I thought, oh, but I got a camera. And so I whipped off my backpack and I rummaged through it, and I found my camera. And when I popped up to take his picture, gone. No lion. And I thought, oh man, sure enough, I looked away and he took off. And as I'm thinking this, he moved his arm, and he didn't move at all. He was exactly where he was before. So this lion was probably 30 feet from me. I knew exactly where he was. And when I looked away and looked back, he disappeared. That's how good their camouflage is. When they hold still, you cannot see these things. They're just amazing like that. And so I got a couple pictures of him, and then it was getting dark. That they kind of look like Sasquatch pictures. You know, you got to use your imagination to a certain extent. You can see him there, but like it was getting dark, and I needed to get back to camp. It was lasagna night, and I didn't want to be out there in the dark with this thing. And so I thought the best thing I can do is try to get him moving again. And I thought if I get ate by him, I'll have a video record of it. So I turned my camera on to video, and I just ran at him and yelled, and he took off. And so then I swooped my pack on and I hit the trail at a trot and kept watching on the uphill side, because that's where lions will land on you from, is the uphill side. And you know, I was sweating it out there for a while, wondering if that cat was going to come get his revenge for me startling him like that. But he never did. And so I made it to camp, and they saved a plate for me. So I got my lasagna, and I hollered at Holly to come look at the pictures of the trail work that needed to happen. And she was looking at him, and I said, oh yeah, and there was a lion. I saw a lion on the way back. And they're, you did not. And I showed them the pictures, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's the lion. You saw the lion. And then they started talking about, oh yeah, for the last few days, we found 2 deer that got killed by a lion up there. And I'm like, seriously? You guys sent me up there? You knew there was a lion up there killing deer, and it's almost dark, and here, nobody said there's a lion. So anyways, I kind of got after him for that. I was like, you trying to kill me? But there's a lion story for you, Stephanie. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's what you got.
Was exactly right what I was looking for. You are a wonderful storyteller. We're at the end of the time. Can you believe it? But let me see. Somebody asked, have you come across any ancient petroglyphs on rocks and cliffs while on the trails?
Well, actually, I have found stuff in Alaska that, according to the, what was her, karst officer or something like that. She studies rocks and this, that, and the other thing. According to her, this was stuff that would change people's theories, and it would wreck some scientist's career and build other people's career. Long story short, I found a cave. I brought her in it, and there was cave art inside this cave, and the stalactites and stalagmites and moon milk and whatnot that had grown across this cave art, it was red ochre stuff, told her that this predates, humans weren't supposed to be here. So this was setting a new bar. And because I found the cave, I got to, you kind of get a little cloud on that, what you want to do with it. And I said that this thing's been here for 20,000 years or whatever you just said, and no one's ever seen it. And I said, I don't want to be the one that identifies this for the world to come in here and tear it apart, because I've seen that happen more than once, where well-meaning scientists wreck stuff in the name of study. And so we pinky sweared, she and I, that we wouldn't tell anybody where this cave was. And I did show, and she showed some other scientists the pictures of the cave art, and they lost their minds. And they actually tried to kind of wreck my career to a certain extent, saying that, this is your job to tell us where this was. And but we never have given it up. And it's some amazing cave art. There was the Tlingit and Hyder area, was the natives, and some just incredible bear heads and beavers and stuff you'd see on totem poles, but it was done in red ochre on the cave wall inside. And it was really cool. So there's some petroglyph stuff for you.
Wow, that is amazing. Somebody says they want to know how long mules live.
They live a pretty good long time. In fact, we were just talking yesterday down at the barn. One of the guys in the area that runs mules, he was wanting us to take this mule off his hands, named Tiny. And Tiny came from the town I grew up in. I saw some Covelo people on the list a minute ago. He used to be Vincent Barney's mule, and Vincent used to actually rope off that mule in rodeos 30 years ago plus. So we think Vincent's probably about 40 years old. Mules, they can really, really hang on for quite a while. But for us, doing what we do, working them like we do, we don't keep them in operation that long. We'll work our mules maybe 20 years or something, 25, and then they start, breaking down a little bit. They're still sound and they're still good mules for a lot of things, but for what we do, not so much. And because our mules are civil servants, they work for the government, we feel that they also deserve a good retirement after working so hard for so long. And they don't get paid, they get hay. So we work pretty hard when our mules are getting aged to find a good ranch for them to have as their forever home, somebody that'll use them a little bit, maybe with kids that are trying to learn how to pack or something like that, where they might still go out on a couple trips a year, because it kind of breaks their heart if you just park them in the pasture and never use them again. They're like duck dogs. They like to go catch ducks. Mules like to go work with the crew.
Well, thank you, Mike. This was wonderful. Thank you for your stories and all the good work you do, your philanthropy with your books, sending those kids clothes so they can go out in the wilderness well dressed or dressed appropriately. Thank you so much for everything, and for the National Forest Service and keeping this all going. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Ivan's big message is never forget.
Stephanie's MarshStream.
Ivan's big message is never forget that you are the owner of public land. So don't forget, I work for you, and everybody that works for me works for you. And all these public lands are yours. So come out and enjoy them and be active.
Are they open during the shuttering?
Yeah, we've actually had more use than ever. We set records this spring for use. People are getting out and distancing themselves from others in large groups.
They're all 7 feet apart, kind of like the pack mules, right?
Let's hope.
Well, thank you for joining me. So glad to meet you up here. I will know now that every time I walk to Bowerman's barn, there's a lion watching me. Is that correct? I just want to ask the question right now. Is every time I walk to the barn, there's a lion watching me? Is that what you're saying? Is that true?
At some point, a lion said, well, there's a lady walking down a road with her dog, Trinity.
Great. Thank you. And everyone give us some tips, buy Mike's book, support the kids, put some money in the tip jar, support the Marsh. We are totally no ticket sales during this shuttering, and Lord knows when we're going to be able to be open, but we are so glad to be able to be doing programs like this. So thank you, and join me next week when you will see another completely opposite interview with Fred Johnson. He does health and healing. He works with John Hopkins and the Strass Center, and he's got a solo performance about being adopted as a 5-year-old, which Mr. Wayne Harris said changed his life. So come on back and see it. And thank you, Mike. I hope to see, they dropped off some mules, and I was wondering if you were there 2 days ago. I hope to see you before I leave. Thank you so much, everybody. Everybody stay healthy and spirited, and go out in those Forest Service and use social distancing, and have a great week. Thank you so much. Bye.
Folks, I hope you're enjoying tonight's performances, and there's still more to come. All presented by the Marsh, a San Francisco institution for 30 years. If you love the arts, and especially the Marsh, I'm asking you to visit our website at themarsh.org and make a tax-deductible contribution to help keep this unique San Francisco establishment open. On our website, you'll see the tip jar. It's easy to click on and contribute, and it's all tax-deductible. On our website, you'll also see up-and-coming events and links to our famous Marsh Youth Theater, which has been working with children from San Francisco for years. You'll also see how to donate to our 30th birthday fund. And feel free to sign up for our newsletter. We'll keep you in the loop on all the great up-and-coming events. Again, themarsh.org. Any contribution will help keep this San Francisco institution alive. Thank you in advance for your loyalty and your support.